So staying in the region of southern Asia, let's fast forward to the 6th century BCE when an Indian prince named Siddhartha Gautama escaped from his family's lavish palace and realized that suffering is just everywhere in the world around him. He'd really been sheltered from that in his upbringing. So he creates a new faith that rejects certain pieces of Hinduism, which is what he had grown up practicing. Primarily, it rejects the notion of the Hindu caste. And it also includes the idea that a person can receive or achieve spiritual reward in one or just a few lifetimes. So reincarnation is still present in Buddhism, but you don't reincarnate through a set number of caste levels to achieve spiritual reward. Spiritual reward for Buddhism is called nirvana, like the band. And so by rejecting the social inequality of the Hindu caste system, Buddhism becomes what's known as a universal religion. A person can come from any background, any ethnic group, any language family, any gender, age, socioeconomic status. You can live anywhere on the planet and you can convert to Buddhism because this faith is not tied to your social standing. Anyone can achieve nirvana if you follow and practice Buddhism correctly. So we're seeing someone who is coming from the upper levels of society, realizing, I want a faith that doesn't care about social standing. So because Buddhism has this reincarnation feature as well, nirvana actually symbolizes your escape from the cycle of reincarnation. Now, I mentioned karma earlier when we were talking about Hinduism. Karma is actually a Hindu concept that the Buddha, which is the name of Siddhartha Gautama, after he becomes enlightened, after he achieves nirvana himself, the Buddha adopts karma into Buddhism, okay? So it actually has the exact same definition, whether you're applying it as a Hindu or a Buddhist. And that is, karma is your deeds and your actions. And these deeds and actions are used to determine where your soul goes when you die. Will you reincarnate up? Will you reincarnate down? If you're in Hinduism, will you just reincarnate into another existence in Buddhism? Or, in both faiths, have you done enough to achieve that final reward out of reincarnation? There's another concept called dharma. And for the Hindu, dharma are your obligations and your duties determined by caste. So a Kshatra warrior would have very different dharma from a Shudra laborer, okay? But in Buddhism, because we don't have the caste anymore, dharma has to be something different. And the Buddha defines dharma as his teachings. So what are his teachings? Oh, we weren't ready for the next slide. Sorry. Sorry. So the Buddha taught 4 noble truths, and they included the truth that all life is suffering, and suffering is caused by desire. And to stop desire, to stop suffering, you have to stop desire. And then finally, you should follow the 8-fold path to stop your desire. Okay. So those are the 4 noble truths. So then what is the 8-fold path? It's doing everything right. Right view, right intention, right speech, right action, right effort, right livelihood, right concentration, and right mindfulness. So some Buddhists, in order to do all of these things right, might choose to withdraw from society and live kind of a reclusive existence. Some Buddhists might choose to withdraw from larger society and live in a monastery where they are not focused on pursuing worldly wealth or worldly recognition. But Buddhists over time also said, I can keep living in the regular world and I can patronize, I can support financially a Buddhist monastery near me. And this is why Buddhist monasteries actually become rest stops along the Silk Road, because merchants would stay at these monasteries between India and China, and they would give gifts to the monks there, and the monks would bless them. The monks would help them secure their spiritual reward, their right things. And so it all kind of ends up working really nicely together, that Buddhism can travel with merchants because you don't always have to give up all of your earthly possessions to be a good Buddhist. Okay, so those are the basics of Buddhism. Let's switch now to another geographic region, East Asia. And the biggest country in East Asia is China. We've also looked at Japan quite extensively this year, especially in those last few weeks before the school year, the regular school year ended and we got sent home. Korea is another East Asian location. And so when we talk about East Asian belief systems, we want to focus primarily on two that are indigenous to East Asia and then one that is adopted from another place. The first indigenous East Asian belief system I want to show you is Confucianism. So interestingly enough, the Buddha and Confucius don't live that far from each other in the big scope of history. We're looking at the 6th century BCE for Confucius. And what this tells us is there really was this kind of like turning point. We call it kind of the end of, or the beginning of the classical era. And what we're seeing here is in a lot of different places around the globe, there was this need for a new sense of order. And so belief systems emerge to try to fill this void in the lives of people. And Confucianism is one that emerges in East Asia. So when Confucius was alive, China was in a period of political decentralization. They're in a time period between strong dynasties. We see the fall of the Zhou dynasty, ZHOU, and then for quite a while, there's just no new family that can take over until the Qin rise. Now, the Qin will use legalism, which is like harsh rules and strict punishments. But Confucius, he advocated for something very different to bring order to the lives of regular Chinese people when there was no strong dynasty that had the mandate of heaven. And so what he advocated for was a belief system that really was centered on your home family life. And if you learned how to behave righteously at home, then you could take that behavior out into the world and be a righteous person out in society too. Okay, so he believed in these 5 key relationships. The world was organized into a hierarchy. The ruler was above the subject, man was above woman, an older brother is above a younger brother, those things like that. And so you learn at home how to be submissive to the people in society, in your family that you should be, how to care for the people in your family that you should care for. And then you take those models out into your daily life. This allows you to cultivate personal righteousness at home. And then the side effect is it stabilizes public society as a whole. Now, by 1200 CE, the official start date of AP World History, we actually see something called Neo-Confucianism that is very, very popular in China. It developed late in the Tang Dynasty, which ended around 906 CE, and it became really, really popular during the Song and the Ming dynasties, which are the first 2 dynasties the College Board could potentially test you on. Now, Confucianism in itself had been embraced by the Han, the Sui. It was used by even Tang and Song and Ming bureaucrats too, because you had this really cool thing called the civil service system, which supposedly made China's bureaucracy a meritocracy, that it didn't matter if you came from a wealthy family or a poor family. If you were really smart, you could pass this exam. Well, the civil service exam was based on the tenets of Confucianism. So we're tying this belief system into the government. Remember that idea of legitimizing a state's power through faith? Well, Confucianism does that for China really nicely. Anyway, Neo-Confucianism is based on Confucianism, but it incorporates elements of Taoism and Buddhism because these belief systems were all present and popular in China for a really long time. Neo-Confucianism focuses on rational, ethical behavior. It's not quite as superstitious and mystical as original Confucianism was. Original Confucianism would have still a lot of elements of like ancestor veneration and the role of deceased ancestors, like meddling in your daily affairs of life. You'd see a lot less emphasis on that in Neo-Confucianism. In addition to being practiced widely in China, Neo-Confucianism also spread to Japan and Korea. But one of the side effects of Neo-Confucianism is, remember how I mentioned like all of the world is organized into a hierarchy and men were supposed to be more than women? Well, Neo-Confucianism is rigidly patriarchal. I like to think that this is because when it really comes to popularity, Neo-Confucianism emerges shortly after Wu Zetian or Wu Zhao, the one woman to ever rule China. It comes about shortly after her death. And she had claimed to be a Buddhist bodhisattva. A bodhisattva is a person who has achieved nirvana, but instead of immediately escaping the cycle of reincarnation, they stay on earth to try to be like a teacher to other Buddhists. So because Wu Zetian had used Buddhism to legitimize her rule, when she dies, these very traditional Neo-Confucian scholar bureaucrats in the Tang Dynasty and in the Song Dynasty to follow, they want to make sure that like the traditional social status quo comes back to China. And so we see China become increasingly patriarchal. And it's also late in the Tang, early in the Song that we see that really patriarchal practice of foot binding emerge in Chinese society for women. Let's go next to Taoism. Let me check my time. I think I can knock out Taoism before I need to start a new video. So Taoism can be spelled with a D like you see here or with a T, and it's the same faith. So don't let that confuse you if you see it spelled differently. The purpose of Taoism is to help a person be one with the Tao or one with the way of nature. You're supposed to go with the flow. I want to remind you of the video clip we watched of the turtles in Finding Nemo. Okay, that's a good Taoist, going with the flow. Taoism is founded around the same time as Confucianism by Lao Tzu. And it's never going to be embraced by any of the dynasties to be the philosophy of rule. But it doesn't have to be, because you can be a good Confucian in your public life, and then you can use Taoism privately in your meditations, in your private spiritual practices to help like center you and calm you from the busyness of the world. We're going to see significant Taoist influences in Chinese art, artwork that is simplistic, that tries to portray harmony within nature. Taoism will also greatly influence Chinese science and medicine. If you've ever had acupuncture or an acupressure massage, that's based on connections that Taoist scientists found within our bodies. And then scientifically, Taoists, these peaceful, go with the flow, reject the artificial man-made rules of society. They were trying to create something that would prolong life. And instead of finding the secret to immortality, which what they were doing with their Taoist alchemy, they actually were the first to invent gunpowder, which does not prolong your life or make you immortal. Anyway, that's where gunpowder comes from. The Chinese invented it, and it was Taoist scientists trying to figure out how to prolong their lives. So, yay! Okay, that's Taoism for you, the yin and yang symbol. Everything needs to be in balance, everything in moderation. A great example of something in our lives that messes everything up, the artificially created concept of time, right? I've got to make sure this video is published and available to you by 7 p.m. tonight. And I'm working against the clock and I'm stressed about it just because man has created time. And it's something that stresses me out hitting deadlines, okay? A good Taoist would be like, deadlines. Or maybe they would just plan better than I did. I don't know.